Now, I know what y'all are thinking, and guess what? It was all bamboozle. That's right, I don't actually hate the end. Actually, according to everyone in Tumblr, the end is probably like the best episode ever. Now, you might be wondering, which is one of my least favorite Eddsworld Legacy episode? Well, I could go after Nerotics, but I don't even have to explain myself why that episode is so bad. No, my least favorite episode has to be The Snoker. Yeah, that's right, I don't like this episode, and neither should you, because everyone knows an Eddsworld fan's opinion is above anyone else's, because we have a very, very high IQ. Thanks for watching this video, and if you excuse me, I'm going to go start doxing the creators of the show. Alright, with the 12-year-old Tom Turret fans out of the way, I guess we could actually start this review. And before you ask, no, I don't think all Eddsworld fans are like this, because they're not. I'm just directing to the people that don't want to listen to anything and just want to say that this is the best thing ever, which it isn't. Eddsworld is a webcomic and animated web series created by Ed Gould, co-starring Thomas Ridgewell, also known as Tomska, and Matt Hargreaves? I don't know how to say it, so I'm just gonna call him Matt Lobster because that's his YouTube name. There was also another co-creator of the show. His name was Tord Larson, but his stay on the show wasn't so long, because in 2007, due to some internet harassment and stalking, Tord asked Ed to permanently be out of the show. And so in the episode 20 Feet Under the Seat, he left the show entirely. And due to some also internet harassment, he went out of the internet as a whole. Poor guy. But with Tord out of the show, that still didn't mean that new episodes would come out. And slowly, Eddsworld became one of the most viewed comedy channels in the entire UK. There's nothing that could go wrong now. Fuck. In March 25th, 2012, after a 6-long battle against leukemia, the creator of Eddsworld, Ed Gould, had died, and many people have thought that this was the end of Eddsworld. Or was it? Ed's last wish before his death was to keep Eddsworld going, and so, not long after his death, Thomas Ridgewell and a couple of other animators started an Indiegogo by the name of Eddsworld Legacy. The Indiegogo was extremely successful, raising around $83,000, with the original goal being $50,000. They created 12 episodes, and the final episode being a two-parter, properly named The End.
Alright, history lesson's over.
Am I a fan of the show? Well, I mean, in one point in my life, I used to love this show to death. It was so good, it was so funny. But then, when I keep getting older, I just thought the show was just fine. Like, I still think it's good, and a lot of effort was definitely put into it, but I just don't find it to be as good as I used to think it was. And the perfect example of what I'm talking about is the two-parter series finale, and the episode I'm talking about today, The End. First of all, some ground rules. Number 1, this video isn't made to harass or attack any of the people who worked on The End. They all worked their ass off, and although it's not perfect, I think they did a pretty good job. Number 2, it's okay if you like this episode. While I may not like it, I bet you do, or you don't. I don't care. But please don't harass anyone who does or doesn't like this episode. And 3, I'm not going to be putting real-life logic into a show that kind of doesn't have any, but I will bring up some stuff that has happened in the show, and not say, oh, this show's unrealistic. Unlike Tickle Fetish Mark Lovato over here.
One of the most adorable things ever conceived in the entire show.
Anyway, with all that being said, let's begin with part 1 of The End. Now, this this part of the video of me talking about the end part 1 isn't really gonna last because there's 2 reasons. Number 1, there really isn't that much to talk about, since this is basically a setup for part 2, which is a whole entire problem within itself. And 2, I don't think this one isn't really as bad as part 2. The episode, or the Eddisode, starts with Matt, Ed, and Tom coming from a fishing trip, with Tom having a harpoon gun. And this is actually important. Yeah, this is not a joke. They actually bring the harpoon gun back. This isn't, well, it is a joke. It actually has plot relevancy in part 2. Is it a good or bad plot relevancy? It's up to you. So when Tom, Ed, and Matt come back home, they find that someone broke into their house. And it's none other than Tord. Now, they do explain why Tord comes back, but not in this part. They explain it in part 2. After that, they explain why, in their Eddsworld way, why Tord left. I already explained why the real-life Tord left, because, you know, internet harassment. But in here they say that it was because he was following his big dreams. And after that, we get shown one of the main problems with this episode. That being that, for some reason, Tord and Tom hate each other more than they did originally. Now, I'm not saying that Tom and Tord before, they were like best friends and all buddy-buddy. No, I mean, back then, they used to be rivals, but it was all safe and fun. It wasn't them trying to kill each other. Damn it, that's a spoiler for, like, part 2. I will expand my point about this more later down the video, but let's keep going. After Tom torture, Tord explains that he's gonna move back in, and then the funniest joke in this 2-parter comes up.
Dum 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 dum.
That's right, the final 2 episodes of a comedic show aren't really that funny, which is kind of weird, really. Well, they do replace comedy more with action, but in my opinion, I do think that there could have been a balance between both comedy and action if they did more meta jokes like this. After that, we have like this cute little montage between the guys and Tord reliving other Eddsworld episode moments, but without Tord in them. But now they have Tord in them, which I think is pretty cute. Like, it doesn't really have that much plot relevancy other than, oh look, nostalgia, but we also have Tord in them. Also, more Tom torture for no reason, so that's nice. After that cute little montage, Tord wants his old room back. However, his old room is now Tom's new room. And after one last Tom torture, Tom is sick of Tord and then leaves the house. And in the end of the episode, we see that Tord is planning something. And so that was the end part 1. Like I said, there wasn't that much to talk about, since this is only a build-up to part 2. So let's discuss the positives and the negatives of this episode. Probably my favorite thing about this episode is the animation. The animation was done by the one, the only, Paul Tervuder, the guy who also animated Fun Dead, which is the best episode in Eddsworld history, and don't act me on that. There's also the music, which, unlike Paul Tervuder's animation, I think it's fine. I mean, it's not the best thing in the world, and it's also not the worst thing in the world. Pretty forgettable and bland in my opinion, though. I also really like the writing, plus the voice acting. While I know that Tord has a new voice actor because Tord Larson is still in hiding from the internet, I think he does a pretty solid job doing a Tord impression. I think it's pretty good nonetheless. Well, with that out of the way, let's talk about some of the negatives in this episode. For some reason in this episode, plus in part 2, Tom and Tord hate each other for no real good reason. In the show, do they explain why they both hate each other more than they did before? No, they don't. But in a Tumblr post that Tomska made, it was basically because Tom and Tord before had a rivalry. But you know who else had a rivalry with Tord? Ed. To be honest, having Ed having the rivalry with Tord instead of Tom and Tord in the end, not only would it make much more sense, but it would fit better. To be honest, in the end, both in part 1 and part 2, Ed seems like a secondary character, sitting in the back seat, having all the spotlight in Tom. I mean, what would you prefer? A rivalry that literally came out of nowhere, being born from just petty making fun of? Or a rivalry that was already built up for like 2 decades ago? Other than that, that's pretty much everything I could critique. Like I said, this was only a build-up for The End Part 2. And hey, speaking of The End Part 2, let's talk about that. The episode starts and I already have a problem. And to be honest, this is actually a world record. Now you might be asking yourself, what's the problem here? Well, the answer is that Tom's plot is basically the main plot of the episode. And this is gonna be problematic later down the line. After that, we come back to Ed, Matt, and Tord watching a movie. And then Tord goes into Tom's room. And then, probably one of my biggest problems with this episode arrives.
Mister?
I have several questions.
There's a lot of unexplained things in this scene and in other scenes when it goes on. So I'm about to ask some typically asked questions that never really get answered in the end. Is that the toxic waste from Snogers? Because it definitely looks like it. Why is there a Tom Monster blueprints in there? Was Tord the one who created him? What's up with the pictures in the wall? And why is there an X in the second one? And does Tom know about this secret room? Well, I think he does, because the same tank from the episode The Snoger appears. And why would Tom, out of all people, keep a framed picture of Tord in his room? Unless, you know, he knows about the entire room and stuff. And, you know, this has been bothering me for the longest time, but what's up with this map? Was the toxic waste involved with this? Was Tord and the Red Army going to waste it into other cities to make the people into zombies and then seem like vigilantes in there? And with all these questions, you might as well think they might as well give us an explanation. Not even one. Damn, I haven't even cared about this show in years, and this is the most emotional I've ever been for this show. After that, we come back to Tom's plot, and then we come back to a pretty funny scene. I mean, it's not as funny as the dun 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 scene, but it actually got kind of a chuckle out of me. After that, we see that Tom finally bought a house or an apartment, and he finds a paper, goes back into Ed's house, and then sees Tord in his lair. Hey, wait a minute! Tom does know about the lair! I mean, he doesn't even ask, what is this place? Or, has this been in my room this entire time? He just goes all like, you're a piece of shit, Tord. Like, why not even ask? It seems that Tord might be some sort of criminal. After that, we finally get to see the reason why Tord came back. And it's because he wanted his little hat. Psych! He came back because he found his fucking robot! This is so fucking ridiculous. Where the hell did this come from? When did Tord build this? Why? And most importantly, if he built it before he left, why didn't he take it with him and complete building it in the Red Army base? It just doesn't make any sense. I just think that they just made this up just to make forced conflict. And let me tell you, there's gonna be more of that. Also, this line from Tord.
I thought we were friends!
Ha! No! What would I need friends for when I've got this? I'm unstoppable!
Yo, low-key, you know what this reminds me of?
I went in there to save you!
That was his mistake.
After that piece of shit, we see that Tom brought a sofa to a missile fight, and then Tord blows up Ed's house and probably killed Tom. I mean, he blew him up. How can he not die from that? After that, we find out that it wasn't Tom who died. It was John for some reason.
Something
Wow, guys, John just died. This was probably a very emotional moment that no one saw coming. Okay, that's it. This is just forced. Like, seriously, how the hell did he die? He wasn't even at Ed's house. The one who was in there was Tom, and he should have died. Like I said, he was in the middle of a fucking explosion. And after that, we find out that, hey, Tom isn't dead for some reason. You know, since he was in the middle of a fucking explosion. But who cares? He brought the harpoon gun back. And this is the part I was talking about back then, where he shoots toward and then the robot explodes. And then we see what could have been one of the best scenes in the entire show. Not just Eddsworld Legacy, but the entire show. After emerging from the ashes of his creation, Tord appears, heavily wounded, picking up a robot arm, and then looking into the background, seeing the shadows of his former best friends and his destroyed home. This could have been an amazing scene. It's all silent, just visuals. But why do I think it could have been, and it isn't? Well, it feels like there's something missing. And this is probably my biggest problem with both the end part 1 and the end part 2. There are so many things left unanswered that leaves to the imagination, but they never explain why Tord did any of this. Why did he break all of his friends' relationships? What was the point of everything? I feel like there should have been a dialogue or a monologue of Tord explaining to Tom or any other character, explaining why he did everything he did in the end. In the end, no pun intended, this is why I didn't like the new version of Tord. He would have become a pretty interesting villain with some interesting motivations to why he did everything. But in the end, the writers decided to make him a literal anime villain that just wants to take over the world. So there was a lot of missed potential here. So after all of that, we see that the guys, as in Ed, Matt, and Tom, moved into different apartments, you know, since Tom bought apartments and shit. And then, after all that, they watch a movie. And then, you know, Ed asks the question why Tom has black eyes, and then they never answer that. And that's the end! So, after all of that, you might be thinking to yourself, oh, this guy's such a negative. You probably don't think that this episode has anything positive about it. Well, the animation is, once again, one of the best parts about the end part 2. It mostly resembles Ed's style of animation, and it's not done by one animator, rather it's a collaboration between other animators, and I think it looks great. Also, remember when I said that that these two episodes weren't funny, but focused more on action? Well, I can gladly say that the action is great. Plus, the animation with it probably makes it one of the most intense animations and fight scenes ever in Eddsworld history. And speaking of the jokes, while they weren't great, hell, some of them weren't even that good, there were some that actually legit made me chuckle, and one or two that actually made me laugh. And then we have the writing. I know there were some things that I did bash on, but there were some parts of the writing that were really, really good. Okay, so with all the positives out of the way, now let's go with the negatives.
That was his mistake!
They managed to ruin Tord in a matter of minutes. Wow. Like I said, I do think that Tord could have made an interesting villain, but in the end, no pun intended, I don't think they did that well of a job explaining why he did everything and why he became a villain in the first place. There was no reason for the giant robot to be there as well, and that lair of his just raises more questions than it does answers. And I kinda see what they wanted to do with Tord's character, but instead they made him a generic villain that wants to take over the world. He is literally an anime villain. Another thing I kinda don't like about The End Part 2, which is also apparent in The End Part 1, is the lack of Ed. I mean, he seems like a secondary character, and he's the titular character. So why is he the main character of the final episode of his show? And like I said, it could have been better if Ed and Tord had the rivalry instead of Tom and Tord. And speaking of Tom, I think he's given a little bit too much screen time. I mean, I don't hate the character. I think he's an okay character. But for the final episode of Eddsworld, I don't see it being appropriate for Tom to be the main character. There were a lot of questions that were left unanswered, which I've already managed to ask. And overall, I just think that the writing, while sometimes being good, it wasn't always so great. And now it's time for my final verdict. Now, do I think that The End, Part 1 and Part 2 are so terrible that it should be written off the Eddsworld lore? No, of course not. And in my opinion, this is a pretty good way to end off Eddsworld. However, it's an overall mediocre episode. Sure, it has its good things, such as the animation, some sort of writing, and some of the jokes are pretty good. The action is also great. However, some of the writing, and especially the characters, and kind of the music, kind of ruined this episode. But overall, I think it's fine. And before you ask, no, I don't think Nerotics is better than The End. I think both of these episodes are equally as mediocre. Anyway, that's all for now. Thanks for watching. And if you liked this video, please consider liking and subscribing and sharing it with other people. Have a nice day, everybody.
That was his mistake!